You are listening to The Scope, Phelps Health Podcast, episode 22. Today we're talking about helping children cope with loss. Let's get started. Hi everybody, I'm your host Paige Heitman. The Scope Podcast is produced on a regular basis and can be found by visiting phelpshealth.org. Come back often and feel free to add the podcast to your SoundCloud stream or subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also follow Phelps Health on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. All links can be found in the show notes. Now let's get into our show. Today our guest is Phil Cox, Interim Director for the Auxiliary and Pastoral Care at Phelps Health. Welcome to our show today, Phil.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's good to have you. We're really excited to have you. We've had you on our Ask a Professional show probably dozens of times over the past few years, so we were really excited to get you on our podcast and really kind of dive into your brain and your experience about a really cool topic, helping children cope with loss. So if you're ready, we're just going to dive right in. But before we do that, tell us a little bit about yourself for our listeners.
Well, I grew up in Northeast Arkansas in farming country. And from there, went to school at Arkansas State University on an ROTC scholarship. Spent 7 years in the military. And then went into full-time ministry after that. And after some time, and came here in full-time ministry. After some changes, I began at Phelps Health, initially as a hospice chaplain, then into the full-time hospital chaplain's role. What I've learned about Phelps Health is the absolute amazing support for what I do. And along the way, I became very interested in two specific areas. One, critical incident stress management, and then even more importantly, grief support, or actually grief recovery. And so that's kind of what brings me here today.
So what is grief support? What does that look like by definition?
By definition, we use two different definitions of grief. One is the normal and natural reaction to loss. Grief is the end of or change in a familiar pattern of behavior. So when you think of it that way, we grieve a lot of things that we may not typically think of as grief. And so we react to those things. And everyone does so in a unique way. My reaction to a loss is different than yours. And we have to understand that it's all normal and natural. And so no one can tell you how to do it or how not to do it. And so that kind of gets us into some other things that I'm sure we're going to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's actually a perfect segue into our topic, which is not only COVID-19, but really helping children cope with loss and grief. Because as you said, grief looks so different in so many different ways, and it's not just the loss of a loved one that children might be grieving, it's the loss of their lives. And what are some of the different types of loss that a child might have this year?
Well, this year, and it depends on the age of the child, but loss of just a familiar pattern of behavior. I mean, when you talk about the end of the school last year, all the way from graduation for older kids, all the way to all the other milestones, proms, all the other things that children go through, just ending the school year with any other celebrations, any of those things that they miss, even saying goodbye to their friends.
Even cleaning out your locker.
Even cleaning out your locker, your desk, saying goodbye to teachers. All of those things that just sort of came to a halt rather suddenly, I'm sure, in some cases. And then getting ready to start a new year with a lot of uncertainty. Different schools have handled that different ways. And it's just different doing it virtually as opposed to in class. And again, some are doing it one way and the other, or a combination of those. And so, again, depending on the age of the child, one way to look at it is for parents or guardians or grandparents or whoever, is to list each event and then try to think like a child. Okay, what's my classroom going to look like when I go? Will our desks be the same? Where will my stuff be? Where will my locker be? Where will we eat lunch? Will I have my own mask? Will they provide us masks?
Can I use the restroom?
Yes. And where will that be? Will my teacher have a mask? Just a list of things, and you start thinking like your child, and then think about the issues that they'll have in mind. And so those are the kind of things that we think about that'll be on their minds and that will be issues that come up to them. And then we start thinking about how we can try to identify with and help them with, and just recognize that those emotions are real.
How do we help children move through those emotions? Because they're going to look really different for every single kid.
Yes, they will.
I know for myself as a child, whenever I was stressed out or something, I would kind of just deal with it, and I would try harder in school, or I might cry on the opposite end of that spectrum.
True.
But my siblings would get very, very angry,
Mm-hmm.
and that's different for every kid. And how do you deal with that anger? Because the first thing a lot of parents want to do is say, hey, you're in timeout.
Right. Well, first of all, acknowledge the emotion is real.
Mm-hmm.
And then just understand and try to find out what's behind that emotion. Because there's always something, whether you're an adult or a child,
Mm-hmm.
there's something behind that emotion. And if you can manage to hear that and just normalize the emotion, instead of trying to stifle it, normalize the emotion, and then see if you can at least open that up to say, I remember I was afraid when I started back to school, or when some kind of similar thing, I was angry when, and that's how you can open that up to them so that they know it's okay to express that. And then try to encourage them to tell you what's going on. And you can never make that happen, but you can encourage them to let them know that it's okay to talk and that you're open to hearing it. And again, allow them to be different, and allow the other kids, help them to not try to fuss at each other for reacting differently. And so that's some ways to.
Yeah, that's really hard when you're a kid, isn't it? To
It
allow
is.
one another to be
Right.
different, because we're taught that you have to act a certain way and be a certain way, especially like in a classroom setting or whenever you're around your siblings. Siblings can be some of the worst culprits of
Very
that,
much so.
right?
Oh, yes.
We love to pick on each other.
That's right.
What about children who just really are struggling, and they come home every day angry or extra sad or extra quiet? Should we be more worried about them?
I think we should be aware. And again, if you can find out anything from another source about what might have gone on at school,
Yeah.
it's best to know your child as best you can.
Mm-hmm.
And, there are a lot of times when you're going to say, again, depending on the age, what happened at school today? A lot of times they'll say, nothing.
It was fine.
You'll get that right.
Mm-hmm.
And my understanding and my experiences is that's going to happen mostly around middle school. You're going to get nothing.
And it'll
Everything's
carry
fine.
on into high school.
That's right, and even more so. But if there has to be something behind that, look for different behavior, especially different outward type behavior that's different. They may be masking fear or anger or something different. There are going to be just days when it's just a bad day, and we have to allow for that, and let them know that if they want to talk, that you're there to do that. But again, you can't force it. And just be on the lookout for different kinds of behavior. If they normally play video games for a while, but if they double or triple that, something else is going on. Again, you're not always going to know automatically. You can't read their minds. But just allow for things to be different, especially during this time.
Yeah, whenever you say you can't read minds, that's a really great point, and it makes me wonder, how can we ask really good questions of our kids to just say, hey, did you have a good day at school? And that's a very yes or no type of question, but how can we ask better open-ended questions to engage our kids better?
Ask them, what was good about school today? What was different about school today? Well, you could say, what did you learn? And they may say nothing. And you have to allow for that. But hopefully knowing your kid well enough to know what might prompt a little bit more of an answer. And so more open-ended questions would be probably the best thing you could do. What did your friend, whoever that is, what did they do? What did they say today? What, did anybody make a comment about your new shirt? Those kind of things. Something that might open up a conversation.
Yeah, those are great tips. What about on the opposite end of the spectrum, practicing self-care? If we do notice that like our child is having a bad day, as we get older, I think we adapt and we learn new ways to practice self-care for ourselves, right? Or hopefully we do. How do we help instill that in our children from an early age to say, hey, if you're struggling, maybe go and take a nap or go and take like a hot bath if that's something that calms you down and helps you enjoy your day a little bit more.
It can. Plus, they have to see us.
Mm-hmm.
See, we're the adults. We go first. They have to see us practicing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
If we are grieving, if we're nervous or anxious, and they see us doing things that we don't want to see in them, they're going to pattern that after us. Things that they say, things that they do, we have to recognize that we may have been doing the same things. And even in some examples, if we pour a drink, if we're grieving, mm-hmm. and we shove a cookie at them to make them feel better, we're setting them up to do the same thing. And so that kind of gets into some other areas, but we have to ask ourselves, what am I doing for self-care that I would like them to do? And those are good examples you used. Take a hot bath. Do something to relax, to help them to feel a little bit better. But again, they're going to look at what we do and hear what we say, and they need to reconcile.
Yeah, children often wind up being copycats or mini-me's of us, and that's, I think, can be really difficult as parents because parents often want to do the best that they can for their children, sure. and they can struggle with being honest with their kids.
Yes.
So how do we toe that line between letting our children know that we're struggling and being strong for them?
Well, it's funny you use the word be strong, because that's one of the myths
mm-hmm.
that we use, is that we feel like we have to be strong. And I understand that we need to model something different than panic, mm-hmm. but being strong sometimes has led us to stifle our own emotions. But we need to let them understand and teach them that it's okay to be emotional, and let them, invite them to be sad by telling them that I'm sad too. And I have trouble too. And it's okay if you're sad. I feel sad today too, because I miss so-and-so, or I miss doing these things too. And so that's the best way, is to be honest with our emotions. And that's if we can do that consistently, we'll go a long way to teach them to do that consistently as well.
Boy, is that difficult though.
Well, and the reason for that is because most of us, it's been not intentionally drilled into us, but we've just received that in our lives, the idea that we have to be strong.
Well, especially for fathers, right? Or for any type of male figure in a child's life.
Exactly. Well, and we hear big girls don't cry too.
Yes, yeah.
We hear that.
Mm-hmm.
And so we grew up thinking that we have to be strong for somebody. And children sometimes try to do that for parents, because they don't see the parents being strong, so they'll take on that role if they feel like they need to. So we have to learn, sometimes relearn, to be emotionally honest ourselves. Even if we don't think we're fulfilling the role we think we should, it'll go a long way to teaching those kids that it's okay for them to be emotionally honest as well.
So that kind of leads me to my next question, which I think is really cool, and I'll be interested to hear your answer. Do children grieve differently than adults?
Well, everyone grieves uniquely.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases, children may do it better than adults, because in some cases they have not learned to cover up their emotions yet, if we haven't been too strict on teaching them not to. And so in some cases, they'll just openly cry, openly shed that, openly show it, get it done, get it out of the way, and go on their way.
Yeah, and then they'll forget about it.
And then sometimes they've done what they need to do. And so they don't necessarily walk around with it. Again, depending on the age, sometimes they're just not ashamed at all to express that. And they're very open about letting you know how they feel about it. And then they're kind of done with it. And so in some cases they are better. Usually the younger they are, the better. So again, depending on the age, they haven't yet learned to cover those up. But when it really comes down to it, every individual is different, whether you're young or old.
Why is it so detrimental to our overall health, especially as we get older, for us to cover up those emotions?
Well, the main reason is because we always engage in some sort of behavior to mask those emotions because we don't want to feel the pain. And if we learn how to do it with things like food or activity or busyness or isolation or whatever when we're young, we're going to do those things when we're older, and those things are going to expand. When we get to be adults, we're going to be so busy that we become fatigued and exhausted and nervous and anxious. And instead of eating, sometimes we still do that too much, then that may become other substances, other types of activities that we don't need to. We call those short-term energy relieving behaviors, STIRBs, and those can be, the hardest part about those is that they work temporarily. We're distracted for a while.
Yeah, it's a quick fix, right?
That's right. But then they don't help in the long run. And then maybe we want to do that again or longer or more, and then we're distracted for a while longer. But in the long run, they can usually hurt us. And we can even include shopping, and we jokingly call that retail therapy. But when we're deep enough in debt, we realize that
It's
didn't
still
help.
an addiction, correct?
Exactly. And so the quicker we learn that there are more healthy ways to handle that rather than those things, the better. And so, again, if instead of telling the child, don't cry, we'll get you a new puppy, replace the loss. If we say, I understand, I lost a puppy too, and it's hard. And let's talk about this. And you can't always replace the loss when it gets to be a spouse or a loved one. You know, it can't always be done. We always want to fix it. And some things are not fixable. Okay? So if we can just acknowledge the loss, walk them through that, and learn to help them with that, instead of doing things to mask it or fix it, then we'll do our children and ourselves much more good.
Yeah, you make a good point. I think some things in our lives, especially as children coping with loss, those sit with us and they become part of who we are whenever we're adults.
Absolutely.
And that's really difficult for a child because their brain isn't fully developed, and I think it's really hard for them to process whatever type of loss they're going through, whether it's like a dog or a family member or one of their friends maybe doesn't want to be their friend anymore. That can really sit with them very heavy.
Yes, it can.
Because that's the worst thing that has ever happened to them in their life.
That's right.
So they have no scope.
And they've got what we call emotional energy that they don't know what to do with. And sometimes they can't express it. They can't define it. But it's just things are wrong. And so they don't know what to do with that. And so it comes out in ways that we call acting out. And, you know, they're not inherently mean.
Yes.
They just don't know what to do with this emotional energy that they have. And so that's where we have to step in and help them acknowledge that something is wrong, to try to find out what that is, and then help them through that.
So if a child is going through all of this, immense loss, let's just say that they've lost a dog and it was their favorite dog. They got it when they were a baby and it's grown up with them and it got ran over, and they're really acting out in school. How can parents or even the child work with like a team at school to work through that process? Because the kid's probably going to have a lot of this emotional energy at school. They're there for like 8 hours a day.
Well, it's helpful if school teachers and counselors know about that loss, just are aware of that loss. And they need to allow for the fact that emotion is going to be there. And it's okay for there to be boundaries on that emotion. You know, I tell people, nobody can tell you how to grieve. My boundaries for other people as far as just suggestions are, don't damage things and don't hurt yourself. You know, just otherwise, allow those emotions to come. But there are some boundaries that you need to put on those things. But just talk with them, sit with them, and you relate to them and say, I lost a puppy once. It was so hard. I had such a hard time. My puppy was my friend. I fed them every day. You see, part of the loss is a routine, a familiar pattern of behavior. Not only your friend, not only your close companion, but the routine of taking care of that. And when we do this full program of helping children with loss, we help them walk through those routines, starting from when they first got the puppy and all the way through when they lost the puppy, all of those things. And what we do is we help them to communicate those uncommunicated things that we all have when we have a loss. And we help them to be able to do those things. Because every time we have a loss, there are things that we wish were different, better, or more. And these are emotional communications, not intellectual, but emotional. So we need to, first of all, they need to be aware that there was a loss and that this is very likely what's going on with this child. And hopefully help them to understand how to work with that. And so first thing is just awareness that there's been a loss.
So this is something that you teach too. You have this program, and it's a 4-part program, right?
Four sessions.
Yeah,
4
where
weeks,
you help
right.
Parents learn how to help their children cope with loss.
Parents, teachers, counselors.
What are the 4 different parts of that program?
Well,
the 4 main parts.
It just has 4 progressive segments. It's, you kind of look at it as 4 pieces of the puzzle, and then it comes together. They're not really, they don't really have 4 separate titles. But what we do is kind of what I described is we sort of brainstorm. Let's pick a topic and list the emotions that a child may have. And we do some brainstorming in small groups. The online version, I can have up to 8 people in the class, and they would break up and they would select what emotions might this child have under this basic topic, loss of a pet. Or on a more serious note, for an older child, a suicide of a classmate. You know, those questions might be, did I know this person? Where was I when I found out? What questions might police ask me? Did I have classes with this person? So you can list many things, what questions might come up in this child's mind. That's what's going on in that child's head.
Yeah, so you're stepping into their shoes.
Exactly. And it's easier to do if you start putting yourself in their position.
Yes.
And so those are the kind of things we do. And then we help the people in the class to help the child to walk through the way to complete those emotions and then to be successful in learning for the rest of their lives how to handle grief so that the outcome of their lives doesn't head into the wrong directions like we've talked about before.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, you're right. I think that's really important, especially for young adolescents, to learn how to effectively cope with their grief and have those conversations so that whenever they're adults, they're ready and they're capable for, life's hurdles, because inevitably they will face more hurdles.
Oh, no doubt. We all do.
I want to give you an opportunity to just leave our listeners with anything important that you think that they would find valuable.
I do have a few things here that I think would give a good summary and very basics that would be helpful. Number 1 is just listen. Just picture yourself as a heart with ears. And that's, to me, the best image to have, is just being very open to listen. The second is to recognize the individuality of every person. Everybody's different. Everybody's unique. People are going to handle things very differently. And also, go first. We're the adults. Don't be afraid to say, I remember feeling sad when, or I remember feeling angry when this happened to me. Okay? And also be patient. Okay? Don't ever try to force a child to talk if they don't want to talk. And also, never say, don't feel bad, or don't feel sad, or don't feel scared. We would never say, don't feel happy. So we shouldn't try to say, don't feel bad, because those are emotions, and you can't just turn them off or turn them on. And also, remember that grief is emotional, not intellectual. And so we just have to allow those emotions to happen. So those are the main things that I would want to just remind people and just leave them with.
Great advice, Phil. Well, today we've been talking with Phil Cox. Thank you so much for being on our show today.
Sure. Enjoyed it. Thanks.
Thanks for tuning into The Scope. If you liked our show and would like to know more, check out phelpshealth.org.